Hey, this is Gina Grad.
Hi, this is Teresa Strasser.
Hi, everyone. This is Mike Errico.
Hey there, this is Casey Cavalier.
I'm Rocky Rose.
And you are listening to The Jay Franze Show.
Lucky you.
Welcome to The Jay Franze Show. A behind-the-curtain look at the entertainment industry with insights you can't pay for and stories you've never heard. Now, here's your host, Jay Franze.
Well, hello and welcome to the show. I am Jay Franze, and if you are new here, this is where we take a deep dive into the entertainment industry to provide you with valuable insights and entertaining stories. This week, we get to talk with a singer, a songwriter, and an educator. We get to talk with Mike Errico. We'll talk to him about how he got a start in songwriting, what it was like working with Jay Joyce, and we'll even take a deep dive into his new book, Music, Lyrics, and Life. Now, the first time I had a chance to see Mike play was in a bar in Nashville. He took the stage with confidence. He sat down in a chair and laid his guitar flat on his lap. His feet then started tapping on some pedals. He then made a beat and even a bass line. He did this all before ever strumming a chord. It was an amazing experience, and I can't wait to talk to him about it tonight. So if you'd like to join in, comment, or fire off any questions, please head over to jayfranze.com. Now let's get started. Mike, sir, how are you?
I'm great.
So good to have you here, sir. Thank you for joining.
I appreciate that.
I have been a big fan of yours for quite a while. I believe I saw you play live. Feels like probably 15 or 20 years ago at this point.
Sure.
Let's just start off with how you got started songwriting.
You know, I got started in sort of a weird way. I really didn't think that I was going to be doing this. I had no idea what I was going to be doing. I should say that straight up. But as I put it in the book, and it's really a true story, my dad is a great keyboard player, pianist, classical, and he signed up for a contemporary songwriting course thinking it was like the great 20th century composers like Debussy and Eric Satie and whatever, that kind of whole thing. And he found it was like Beatles and post-Beatles, and he was like, oh, this is terrible. But he didn't want to get his money back. He didn't want to take money back from an artist, whatever. We happen to have the same last name. So he's like, you know what? Why don't you go? And I bet he's ruining that moment. But I went, and I just showed up the next week as him. I took the course, and that's really what started it.
That's awesome. I love that.
It's definitely not one of those things like, oh, I was doing it when I was 9 years old. All that. No, it definitely was not.
So you started kind of by accident, but I assume it was like a bug. It bit you a little bit and you wanted to keep going?
It kind of did. I was really interested in it. I thought it was a really cool thing. You know, I always played guitar, whatever, but like, you know, I was learning how to play the guitar. I started like classically, and then I went into other thing, whatever, and then Eddie Van Halen, whatever, all that stuff. I just started getting bored of those types of songs because I kept waiting for the guitar solos. I was like, wow, you know what? The rest of the song should probably be as interesting to me as the guitar solos. Maybe there's somebody there who actually does that kind of thing. And then I started doing the dive and bumped into Joni Mitchell, bumped into, you know, whatever, the greats. And yeah, and then it's sort of like started getting really interesting.
So you started with the typical guitar influences, and then you started moving into more of the Joni Mitchell, which is the songwriter style. Who is your biggest influence?
The big one for me, I know it may be hard to believe, but the biggest one for me was always, and still kind of is Stevie Wonder.
Oh, yeah.
And I still, when I walk into a restaurant or walk into a bar or whatever, and they're playing Stevie Wonder on the overhead, I always take it as like an omen that this is a good place, that something good is going to happen or whatever. Because I always just sort of, he's always in the back of my mind somewhere. I used to really, really listen to him and absorb him and stuff like that. I mean, since then I've moved on into my own thing, but definitely him and the ones who influenced him, including people like the Beatles. So yeah, that was kind of it. The guitar stuff, somehow I got into the guitar thing and I was backing a lot of other musicians, a lot of other bands and stuff like that. And that's, I think, even more where the bug came, because I was like, you know what? I can do that. I think I can do that. I think I can front this place. So it was finally when my guitar teacher was like, you know what? If you want to play the guitar for the rest of your life, learn how to sing, which says a lot about my guitar playing. I was like, oh, right. So then if you sing, you have to have words, you know what I mean? So like everything was backwards. Everything came to me backwards. That's sort of what was going on.
So at this point, do you consider yourself more songwriter or more guitar player?
Definitely more songwriter. And more than that, I feel like prose writer and teacher have really taken a totally new life. Even though like I'm in the studio now, I'm recording an EP, whatever, but like the concepts and the stuff that's happened from the book and since the book has really made me very interested in pursuing that.
I mean, you're an incredible guitar player as well as a songwriter, but you have this approach to the guitar. I've seen you do some crazy things, whether it be with loop pedals or with the guitar on your lap.
Yeah.
I mean, how does something like that even come about?
It's funny. All of that came about from, I was a guitar player. I was playing with other people. I was getting paid to do that. Then to become a front person, I would have to pay others, which I could not do because I just didn't have the money. And so playing on the guitar, like knocking on it or trying to create more people out of the guitar is really where it came from. So trying to fashion a bass line, fashion a rhythm section or a kit or something like that out of the guitar, I felt like was getting a little bit more out of the instrument, particularly with the acoustic guitar. Can't really do as much of that kind of stuff with the electric. But at the same time, you know, a lot of people do that kind of stuff and it's like wildly difficult. You know what I mean? Like it's like TikTok stuff where it's like, holy cow, I can't believe you did that, whatever. That I've always tried to be like, make it easy enough that others can do it and others can replicate it in the same way that like a 3-chord song or a folk song is easy to play. And that's why people learn the guitar on like Bob Dylan songs and, you know, the songs that are accessible. You know what I mean? Because like pop music, there's an accessibility that's a real important part of the whole thing. So that's something I've always tried to remember.
Do you take that into consideration when you're writing a song?
You know what? Sometimes I do. And when I do, it can go either way. It can be too dumb. When you dumb it down and it becomes dumb, who's to blame? You know what I mean? The dummy who came up with the idea of dumbing it down. But, you know, I do try sometimes to do things that are either simple or if they're not simple, they are repeated so that the pattern, you know, people are smart. So like if you get it more than one time, you're able to follow.
Well, you say that, right? You talk about dumbing it down or simplicity, but your lyrics are pretty complex. And you even add humor into your songs. So, I mean, it takes it to a different level. It's not it may come across as the 3-chord or 4-chord song, and it may come across as simplistic, but in reality, it's pretty creative. Wouldn't you say so?
Well, yes. That's something that's really interesting about songwriting and the singer-songwriter type songs, because they can operate on levels. So I always want to have levels available for those who want to go. But if they don't want to go and they'd rather just vacuum the living room and have something on that's nice or whatever, I'm not leaving them behind. I also pick my spots. Like sometimes I'm like, I don't care if no one hears this ever. Like this one's for me, folks, you know, and the other one comes out of my live experiences. Like this is for the bar. This is for raising the glass and whatever, you know, and working that room, because for better or worse, I mean, that's really where I cut my teeth, you know, was playing bars. So it gets too delicate, you can delicate yourself right out of the room.
Well, you talk about playing in bars, and it can be tough. It can be harder to play in a bar sometimes than it could be to play in a stadium. You've got that audience right there. You can see every face. You can see if they're getting into your music or not. And you have a way of drawing them in and including them, engaging them in that moment, right down to the comedic lyrics. My favorite of your songs, which is called Daylight. And I like it, not only the acoustic version or the live version, but also the full production version. Mm-hmm. But the lyrics are clever. Yeah. And I mean, I almost choked the first time I heard Woman Number 2.
Right.
So can you tell me how a song like that comes about?
Okay.
And is there a woman number 2?
There is a woman number 2, or there was a woman number 2, and I assume there still is. I don't know, but we don't keep up. We don't keep up. But where that came from was a style that I found that finally fused a lot of things together, and it was Ani DeFranco who actually was able to marry anger, humor, optimism, percussive sort of guitar playing, and a real connection to an audience. Like, I remember I saw Ani play at the Beacon Theater in New York, and it was one of those moments, and there's only a few of these types of moments in my life, where it was like, I saw Ani play and did not sleep. I did not sleep that night. I was like, I saw something, and it wasn't even Ani. It was a door opened. You know what I mean? And it was like, she was funny and cutting and sarcastic, but also heartfelt and genuine, you know, and honest. It was like a whole bunch of things all at once. And I was like, okay, that's the news right there. So Daylight was really one of that. And I've done several like that, you know, several types of songs like that. But I owe a tremendous amount to Ani, who I can't get in touch with, by the way. I've tried, and I almost got in touch with her once, and I was in the same room with her, and I chickened out. So, and maybe I don't want to meet her, but like, I don't know what I would say. I mean, thank you, I guess, is what I would say. And she'd be like, who are you? So it'd be like really awkward, and maybe it's better that I didn't say anything.
Well, sometimes you don't want to meet the heroes, right?
True.
But I mean, it is an amazing song, and I don't want to let it go undone. And I will put links to both the audio and the video in the show notes so people can go back and check it out. Cool. I wish we could play it on the show, but we can't. So I'll go ahead and put that in the show notes. Mm-hmm. When you're doing songs like that, or when you're writing songs, do you ever face challenges like writer's block or anything like that?
Yeah, I don't face writer's block, but I definitely face fears, which manifest as I'm no longer writing. Like, I've stopped writing. Maybe that is writer's block, but really what it is just like, I'm afraid of saying the thing that is gonna really expose me. You know, I don't actually believe in writer's block, and as a teacher, I remind everyone that there's no such thing. I mean, the only real writer's block is getting hit by a bus.
That could put an end to it.
That's the end of the writing. But other than that, there really is fear that needs to be faced. So then it becomes about writing about that. One thing that was really interesting that a writer that came into my class, Sam Hollander, who's written tons of hits, he said that writer's block comes from not having worked the day before, which I thought was like, wow, okay. He's hardcore. And I thought that was a really cool way of thinking about it. But if I get writer's block and stuff like that, it's really that, like, I hear something and I'm not ready to say it. That's what writer's block is in my own career.
So when you say that, do you find yourself having challenges opening up?
Yes. 100%.
Really?
Yeah. And because it comes out and the first draft comes out and it is cringe. I mean, it is just really awkward, and it can be really, you know, if you really look at yourself, you can be very off-putting. You know what I mean? Like, you can be off-putting to yourself. And part of the writing process is like actually writing it down and taking these abstract ideas and committing them to something that now you have to live with or live up to or whatever, that kind of stuff. So, the mirror can be a very harsh mistress or critic or whatever you want to say. So, so that's something that I just have to reckon with sometimes, especially when I feel like this one's not going to play in the bar. This is not radio friendly. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. Then I just have to gird the loins and go forward.
That's funny. I mean, your songs, they seem pretty open to me. So, I mean, you seem to share an awful lot about yourself in these songs.
That's the work, man. That's what I try to do. Yeah, you should hear the other stuff. It's terrible.
Nice.
I'm just kidding.
So when you sit down to write a song or approach the songwriting process, what do you feel is the most important quality to have?
I've tried a few different things. For this new EP, I've tried something completely different, which is just like, I guess it's David Byrne refers to it as emergent storytelling, where what you're doing is like you're playing something, whatever it is, and you are free associating a melody on absolute nonsense lyrics. So that is a skill that one has to get over as well. Like, I'm actually going to sit here and speak in tongues for a little bit. But then after a while, when you're speaking in tongues, you're sort of singing, there are consonants and there are vowel sounds, And so what someone like David does is tries to match words or find words that are matching the vowel sounds that have come out as a result of the emergent melody. And what comes out is no. And whether or not it makes sense in the first drafts or the second, or maybe even down to the final, maybe it doesn't even make sense, which again is like a good thing. I think it's Rivers Cuomo, the lead singer of Weezer, says, like, if I understand a song after singing it enough times and I figure out what it's about, it dies. If I'm still living in the question, I can still sing the question. The singing the answer kind of takes the fun out of it. So that's sort of more what I'm trying to do now.
So when you sit down to write a song, like just take Daylight, for example, when you sit down to write that song, are you approaching it musically first, lyrically first? Is it something that happened to you that you just felt like you had to get out?
I was mad.
A little bit.
There you go. That was the first thing. I remember exactly where I was, and I was trying different tunings thanks to people like Joni Mitchell did a lot of stuff in alternate tunings that I found beautiful, because as a soloist, if you have these big guitar, all 6 strings working, it's just a bigger guitar, it becomes a bigger sound. I found the initial riff and just started rolling with it. And the story of the song is like kind of baked into the song, and it happened. There was like a little bit of dictation going on as well. As I was doing that and being mad, I was also laughing. And like, I have found in classes that I've taught, if the students are laughing as they're writing, even if it's the saddest thing in the world, the laughter itself like opens up the imagination, because it's coming to you as like a stroke of genius. That's also something that you can always say, I was just joking. So I remember just sitting in my room, just cracking myself up. And I know that when my students are cracking themselves up, they are writing in an open mode. So that was kind of going on too.
You mentioned teaching, and I've taught at a couple engineering schools quite a bit in the past, and I never thought I would be a teacher. It was never something that I ever dreamt of. Yeah. I was just working in the industry and got to a point where people were asking advice and then asked me to come in and teach. But you've taught at some of the great schools, including Yale, which between Yale and being a New Yorker, it's hard for me to have this conversation, sir, because, I'm more from the Harvard side and from Boston.
Oh, gosh.
So, there's a little bit of conflict there, but...
All good. It's all good.
So when you're teaching at a class like that, you get students come in. They're signing up for a class. Are they in a music major, or are they taking this as some sort of elective?
No, they're not usually. Well, one of the places I teach, is NYU's Clive Davis Institute of Recorded Music. And that place, you can have a major that is like songwriting or music industry or engineering, production, et cetera, et cetera. So there is that. I also teach at the New School. You can do the same. But at places like Wesleyan or Yale, they don't really have that, and they don't know where to place songwriting, which has always been so interesting to me, because the fact that there's a simplicity is partially baked into the thing, it kind of feels like it's not really music theory, right? Because it's like kind of simple. It's not like we're not going into the weeds as far as that goes. So it's not really music. Plus there's all these lyrics. So maybe it's in poetry. So maybe it's in the English department, but it's not really in the English department, right? So then it's neither of those. It's not poetry. It's not music. It might be American studies because it's kind of cultural, social history. It's like, except when it's not, So like it straddles a lot of things. And I think for a lot of reasons, that's why people don't totally understand it or respect it, I think, in a lot of ways, in the ways that you would respect, like, I wrote an orchestral piece or something, I wrote a song is not, I took English degree level of language, I put it into a poetic meter, and then I learned how to play an instrument, and then I played that, and then I set a melody to it and a rhythm to it and a harmonic basis underneath it at the same time. You know what I mean? Like, so people don't see it like that. They're just like, oh, it's 3 chords. You know what I mean? So when I teach at those places, it is like a specialty thing. But what I find is that the students who are there are starving for it. I mean, it's a popular form, and a lot of schools like don't work with it because they don't know how to put it into their curriculum. I don't know who to eat lunch with. You know what I mean? I just like so you have my tray and I just sit by myself.
That's funny. I mean, there's so many things there I want to touch on, but let's just start with, how did you get started? I mean, how did you get into the school system in the first place?
Again, backwards. Ridiculous. But I remember I was touring. I got a call. I was driving and I picked up the phone, and it was a friend of mine who happened to be the dean of Berkeley College at Yale University. And he was like, you know what? I have these students who want to get into songwriting, and there's no one here to talk to. Why don't you come and talk to us? And I was like, well, I would do that, but I don't know anything, right? I mean, so I'd had like a couple of record deals and I'd toured a bunch and all of that. And I never really put it together that like that was an accumulated knowledge that might actually be transferable to someone. And, he didn't take no for an answer. And he's like, I'll see you there. And I was like, okay. So I went, and I just had this aha kind of moment. First of all, that I had something to contribute. And second of all, that I had something to contribute that people actually also really wanted. Like those students were really learning stuff that I was like, oh, I thought everybody knew that, So that's sort of how it started. And then the ball just started rolling, and I started calling people, and I started calling schools, and I was just like, I got to keep doing this. Like, this is great. It feels it's giving to me. Like, you're a teacher. So like the generosity, I think, that teaching has baked into it, it balances out all sort of the narcissism of it and also the narcissism of the music industry. So it puts me in a place that I'm really comfortable with. So that's how I sort of got into it. After that meeting up at Yale, that was in 2013. I haven't missed a semester or a summer since. Like, it's been straight. No breaks. No summer breaks, no spring, no spring fling, no fall, Thanksgiving, long weekend, nothing.
That's crazy. I know when I got into it, I have a mother-in-law who is a retired teacher. I have a good friend of mine who has multiple degrees, speaks multiple languages, and is a teacher. And I was asked to come in and teach. And I always thought, like, what am I doing? I'm not an educated teacher. I don't know what you want me to say or do when I come in here. And when I finally did it, and I found out it was more of what was going on outside of the classroom just as much as it was inside the classroom.
Yeah.
People would ask for those stories. And it turned out that the life experience of working in the studio with such great artists was what they wanted to know about. And then if you could tie that back to a lesson of engineering or production, that was how it all came together.
Yeah. When I see like job opportunities or whatever for a teaching position or whatever, it's always like these terminal degrees. You know, you have a PhD in music theory would be great, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, you know what? I was in a van the whole time. So I didn't get those degrees, whatever. So it's like this degree, that degree, master degree in this, blah, 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 or commensurate experience.
Right.
I was like, commensurate experience. That's me.
That works.
It does. It does work.
That's how I was able to sustain it while I was doing it. And since I've gone back to school and backed up what I was trying to do in the first place. So it was, again, like you said, a backwards way of doing things. So I want to take a deep dive into your book. But before we do, are there any misconceptions that you think people, when they hear about songwriting, that they think in a certain way that really isn't?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few. And I feel like I see it like almost as a meme, or like people just generally think it, that that the lyrics don't matter, and B, lyrics that don't make sense also don't matter. Like neither of those things are true. But I say to people, like, what do people tattoo on their arms? The horn charts? Like they don't, right? It's the lyrics, right? So the lyrics are actually touching people. The biggest types of music out there, the biggest genres, hip hop, country,
storytelling.
These are storytelling, lyric-based forms. Also, lyrics that don't make sense are also very important. So, like, people think like, oh, they're just going la 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 or do 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 or whatever, but that's a really communal experience and something that can be shared more easily than like a clever line. You know what I mean? So, like, both of those things I think are a big deal. And I think those are misconceptions. I mean, how many misconceptions? I mean, how much time do you have? There are lots of misconceptions, but I think those two stand out to me at the moment.
Very good. All right, well, let's go ahead and take a deeper dive into your book, Music, Lyrics, and Life. What was the inspiration behind it?
The classes. I mean, everything comes to me out of the classes, and the classes came out of my life of doing this. So I was working and creating syllabi and realized that I had to assign too many books because no book was saying the thing that I wanted to say. So there are books full of interviews with important people. There are books that are absolutely brilliant at breaking down the architecture of songs. And there are and two or three other types of things. And I was like, you know what? This is not doing it. And it's also not doing it in the style in which I teach. So all roads were kind of leading towards this thing. I had tried to do like your typical tales from the road and all this kind of thing. And like I did it, and it's what happens on the road. Oh, the motel was terrible, whatever. Like you've heard it a million times. So I gave it to a literary person, and they were like, you know what? This is really bad. But the stuff about writing and learning and teaching and all that stuff is awesome. So how about you take you out and put the lessons in, and I think you'll have something. So I did. I chopped the book in half, took me out, put more lessons in, and then that's how the book came to be. And it's been great. I mean, it's been really great for people who've taken my classes, and also for people who don't go to these giant schools that are so expensive. So I feel like what it's done for them is it's increased access I can talk to people for less than $250,000 over 4 years, you know what I mean? Or whatever it is that it costs, to go to these schools.
That's funny. I can completely understand that too. When you're writing the book and you're taking yourself out of it or chopping it in half and going with lessons versus probably more stories, do you feel like that is making your book different than others? Is that making your book stand out?
Yeah, it didn't come to me as I want to do a, book on songwriting. It didn't really come to that. And a lot of the reasons that it didn't go that way purely is because in office hours, talking to students, it's not what we talk about. What we talk about is, oh my God, my parents are going to kill me. I'm in music school and I'm never going to make a dime. What am I doing with my life? Is this the right genre for me? Am I throwing away a perfectly good, finance career? Whatever. All of the things that you would be thinking about, and of course all the other existential problems, whatever the existential problems are, that's what we were talking about. And so that's sort of the life part of it. And it flows immediately into things like writer's block, because writer's block is fear, and fear comes from life, So it was not enough to me to be like, the chorus should do this, and more like, take a look at your own mind and your own life and your own heart and figure how you can navigate it via songwriting. Not fix it, certainly, but just navigate it, because that trip is the trip that we're all taking. And that's the universal part of it, that you can sing along to our universal journey. It's a pretty cool trick. It's a pretty cool thing. So that's sort of why it's not like how to write a hit song in 5 weeks or whatever. It's not that. It's deeper because the subject is deeper.
You mentioned the challenges students face with talking to their families about taking on a career that typically is hard to break into, and you're probably not going to make a lot of money. And I faced those challenges myself. My dad was the first in our family to ever go to college, and he got a degree in civil engineering and went on and opened his own construction company. And, it was more of an expectation like that for myself. And I started down that route, but I made the mistake of playing in a rock band in high school and really liked it. I wasn't good enough to make a career at it, but I knew I wanted to be in the business. And that's when I went to school for engineering. And doing that, my family never thought I had a real job. It was always on every holiday, on every break, when are you going to get a real job? Even when I was teaching at the colleges, full-time professor, I was the head instructor at the college, and still not good enough. It was still music. It was never accounting or, engineering like that.
Right. Which hilariously, well, not hilariously, but ironically, people are now like, oh, accounting is going to be just completely wiped out by ChatGPT. So those bedrock careers, or whatever, there's no bedrock career. This is as chancy as being a doctor. You can lose your shirt at anything. You know what I mean? So that's something that I kind of try to tell them about, but don't quit your day job, that kind of stuff, that kind of talk. My students are getting it all the time, but who doesn't get that? The football players. Oh, he's on the college football team. What an amazing thing. Really? Do you know how many people make it to the NFL? Do you know how long they stay in the NFL? 3 years, 2 years, and then they blow their knees out or whatever. And but everyone thinks that's cool. I don't know. I don't understand it. But if you pick up a guitar or something like that, or you're in engineering or whatever, it's oh boy, the music industry, not the football industry.
That's very true. I never thought about it like that, but you're right. And there's, to every one or two people who break into the NFL, there's hundreds that never even come close.
Totally.
And then even if you are one of those one or two people that make it, the odds of you succeeding and staying in there are pretty low. You get injured, you end up going bankrupt because you mismanage your funds. There's so many things like that happen.
Or you're a bust, right? everyone's like, oh my God, you won the Heisman Trophy. You have all this accolades, and you just don't perform. It doesn't work. So, I mean, that happens. It just happens. But, but don't be in music. I'll tell you that.
It's crazy. So when we go back to the book, I assume the audience for your book are your students.
Yes.
For the most part. I mean, anybody can pick up your book to learn from it, but it's always from a student's point of view.
It is kind of, but it's one of those things where like there's a famous writer, Haruki Murakami, who wrote a book called What I Talk About When I Talk About Running. And it's not really about running. I mean, it's about running, but it's about all the things, perseverance, weather, and whatever, your body, et cetera, et cetera. So it's all those different things and how it affects a writer's life, that's what he does. But he happens to be a writer who also does like those ultra marathons. Like one marathon wasn't enough.
26 miles, and I still feel like I got more in me.
It just didn't cut it. So like, how about 150 or whatever, whatever they run. So yeah, it sort of is like that. I'm thinking of another book by David Lynch, the film director. He had a book called Catching the Big Fish. And it is about the metaphor of fishing, but it's about meditation and life and lots of other type things. So this book is sort of built on that. It's about songwriting, but it does not have to be.
Are there strategies you can think of when it comes to writing a song?
Yeah, there are strategies for certain types of songwriting, I think. Like I've done writing for TV and for film, so there are strategies involved. There are parameters. And when I give song prompts, what I'm basically doing is giving parameters that one would have to strategize to make work. If you're just purely songwriting, which I think actually happens pretty rarely, the big strategy for me starts with journaling, with getting your ideas, the action of taking your abstract thoughts or abstract feelings, whatever, and committing them to something, right? It can be a page. It could be Madison Cunningham I spoke to. She does it. She types it out. Other artists they'll put their ideas into 8 bars, right? They're just like 8 solid bars on a digital audio workstation. And that's the way they journal. That type of thing to me is a good opening gambit, getting something abstract into something concrete and then massaging it as it goes. Nothing works every time, which is another thing. So having more than one strategy, having an option A, B, and C is not the worst thing in the world, because some people are like, I start with a title and that's it. So what I need is an awesome title and I'm good to go. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. Basically, to pull from David Lynch, the thing that works is showing up. Put the line in the water to catch the fish. If you're not in the boat.
If you're not there, it's not going to happen.
Right. But once you get there, there's a lot of sort of strategies that can be employed.
I've worked in Nashville for 20 plus years, and that's the world of songwriting. I mean, songwriting there is a business, and it is structured like a business. You have writing appointments that you show up to at a certain time. They're always in like a publishing house, in a writer's room. So they're the most sterile possible environments you could be in. So there's really no inspiration when you're sitting in these rooms. Then you take them into the studio and we record demos, and even that's structured. You got a 10 a.m. session, you got a 2 o'clock session, and you just go through these sessions. Coming from the north, we went in the studio at 10 o'clock at night, and we took our time and we felt a vibe and a feeling, and we went into a particular room and we had things in the room that inspired us. And that's what writing songs and recording songs was like. And then when I went to Nashville, it was very businesslike. But one of the things you just mentioned there was the DAW, it's digital audio workstation, and the technology behind it. So how are you finding technology enhancing or harming the songwriting process?
Well, I feel like that's a debate, really. I mean, I'm sure there are people who would go one way or another on that. One thing that's really interesting to me is that, my children and I and my wife listen to the Beatles a lot for whatever reason, because it's common ground in a crazy way. Just listening to what they're sort of doing is all pre auto-tune. It's pre a lot of that stuff. It's pre guitar tuner. So a lot of the guitars are kind of out. And so in the book, I speak to like some of the producers, like Jay Joyce is one. And he's two things killed music. One is the guitar tuner and the other is the click track. He's like, I will use it. I'll use either, whatever. We have to do those kind of things. But you listen to, I don't know, Rolling Stones, I think was the ones that he mentioned. And it's the rub of the tuning against each other and the different instruments creates something that cannot be created if everybody's at a 440, at a strict tune, in tune. Because it's, in a way, it's not meant to be perfect. So technology is all about, it just makes it better and better. Like better and better, as in like more and more accurate. And it can really pull the guts out of it. It can pull the life out of it. And, those old tunes, they still resonate. And it's an absolute mystery. I mean, we just went on a road trip. It was Easter weekend. So we went to see the, family, whatever. We put on Sgt. Pepper. And like, I was driving, I almost drove off the road. I mean, I was like, this is an unbelievable album that like is also immediate in a weird way. And I just feel like part of it is because like I can sense them and not the technology. As technological as that was, I mean, there's something that's there. And like you'll listen to that stuff and go like, I know that wasn't auto-tuned because auto-tune wasn't invented. That's an incredible relationship between the listener and the artist, because like there's just fewer tricks. They have fewer tricks up their sleeves. And I think we kind of sense it. It feels honest. The recording of it feels honest.
Goes back to what you were saying earlier and just keeping it simple.
Yeah. Whereas, there's the other side, of course, which is like there's nothing like the shine of a Taylor Swift tune that was co-written with Max Martin and everybody's there and it's shake it off, and everything is bing, bang, spot, perfect, That's just it's a different ride. But in both ways, the invisible hand, I think, for both of those is technological.
Right. It's funny, you mentioned a lot there, but I can't imagine being back there. I didn't even think about that there was no tuner. So I'm assuming you got a tuning fork. You're tuning to that or the best you can, and it's all relative at that point.
Right. Or the piano.
Yeah.
If the piano's in tune. I mean, like...
Right. So you're tuning to an out-of-tune piano is essentially what it comes down to.
Happened. And if you really listen, because I do this like close listening, A-Bing against different songs. I just did this by mistake once. I wanted to show different song forms. So, here's the classic verse, chorus form, whatever. And I play like a Taylor Swift song or something like that. And I was like, here's like a strophic form, which is like A. So it's, I use a Bob Dylan song where, I don't know, Blowing in the Wind or something like that. He hits the first chord and I'm like, holy God, that guitar is out of tune. I can't believe it. Like that would have been like the first chord you hit. It would be like, take two. Bob, can you just tune your damn guitar, please? But like no. And like, are those strings like brand new? No, they've
never been changed in years.
They haven't been changed in years. I mean, like, but you can sense that in a weird way. But like, if you A/B like modern stuff against classic stuff, it's crazy. It's crazy how many mistakes there are. My wife, I don't know, for whatever reason, we were laughing about Light My Fire, the Doors tune. And we were just, we were laughing about the organ part or whatever, that starts the song. Iconic sound, whatever. You listen, he messes up. There's a mess up in that opening of that song, which is like
one of the biggest hits ever.
It's one of the biggest hits. certainly one of their biggest hits ever. And there's just a mistake, and they all knew it, and they all let it go because I guess it had a vibe, or they ran out of time, or they didn't have enough track, or whatever the hell it was. But there it is. And I said to her, because she's not a musician, I was like, was that a mistake? And she's like, oh, I thought that was part of it. I'm like, no, that was not part of it. That was definitely a mistake. Anyway, so we had this debate back and forth. And the fact is that it's just there. And I would have edited that out. I would have gone in with a little pencil. And I would have messed
edited out, drawn the right part.
I would have drawn it just so. And that's just not right.
The different bands you're referencing, the Beatles, you got George Martin, you talk about perfection, so you've got people like Mutt Lange or Dan Huff that are just amazing producers, but you also mentioned Jay Joyce. And Jay Joyce, his studio is different than the typical Nashville studios where he's located. And I worked for a producer named Bob Bullock. That's where I spent a lot of my time when I was in Nashville. And the guy that I replaced went on to work for Jay Joyce. So I've had a lot of experience hopping back and forth between the two places. Right. But Jay Joyce, he worked on one of my favorite projects for a band called Hailstorm, which is a rock band. And it was just amazing to see the differences and how different he does things compared to your typical Nashville session.
Amazing. I've worked with him myself. He was going to record my debut. He's on the debut, but as a guitarist. But I went down to Nashville with him. And I was buttoned up, man. I'm like New York guy, and we're down in Nashville, and oh my God, this is such a cool, professional moment, whatever. I walked in, super, buttoned up and, warmed up, hydrated. All my voice, stuff was all together, whatever. And he just picks up a microphone, and he's, puts it on a stand, and, his dog is walking around, and he hits the red light.
Yep.
And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. Jay, I think your dog's in the... He's like, yeah, come here, Max. The dog comes over and he's like, I'm sorry, are you allergic? And I'm like, no, but there's a dog in the room. Is that okay? He's like, yeah, it's
fine.
And so I actually, for one of the demos that we worked on, I was literally petting the dog as I was singing. And you can hear the collar sort of jingle a little bit, and it sounded awesome. You know what I mean? And
it was in time.
Everything he did was it was like Jackson Pollock. It was like paint splatter, and then you're never going to get a take like that again, right? So in the book, I interview him, and he's like, "Yeah, I'll tell the bass player and the drummer, I'll give them different directions and not tell them, and they'll make a mistake, but they'll make the mistake, right? And then it's their compensation or whatever. It's their musicianship that is going to make a moment that would otherwise not have happened, which I thought is just incredible, because it's not the same as seat of the pants. It's actively injecting the chaos that technology has drained from a lot of the songwriting and a lot of the recordings. He talked about taking songs out of A440 entirely and going into different tunings because that was hipper, or not even hipper. It was something they used to. A440 didn't used to be A440. It used to be 438 or whatever. And they were like, that's going to give us a vibe, And he laughed about it. He's like, yeah, we tried it.
Yeah, just tried.
Nothing happened, but I really liked the album. It was really cool. It was just a drag to try and tune everything. So it was really. His approach is really cool, and he's just A-list. I mean, he's just Eric Church is just one of the people he's working with.
Eric Church could not be a nicer guy.
Yeah.
A quick little tangent. I have 3 children at this point, 3 girls, a 1-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 13-year-old. And when my 13-year-old was first, and yes, I'm old and I shouldn't be having these kids, but my 13-year-old, when she was first born, Eric Church had his first baby at the same time. And we were talking about, he keeps asking me all these questions about parenting. How do you do this, or how are you handling that? I'm thinking to myself, I don't know. I'm here with you.
Right,
my wife's home with the baby.
Yeah.
She's the one to ask those questions to.
Yeah.
But going back to the technology in the studio, I grew up in the tape era where you're recording on 2-inch tape and so forth, and I've seen it transition to digital tape or then transition into Pro Tools and that type of stuff. And I have no care. I have no dog in the fight. I liked recording on tape at the time, and I like recording in Pro Tools now. I'm a big Pro Tools user. I mean, I'm a heavy Pro Tools user. Mm-hmm. And I get a lot of work in Nashville because I can edit fast. I can tune vocals as much as I don't like to do it. But I could do all these things. And to me, technology is just there. It's just another tool. It's how you use it, because there's still tape machines around. Right. There's, you can, if you want to record on tape, go ahead. But the speed of the digital world is much better, or much faster anyway. But do you see any challenges in your line of work as a songwriter when you come into the studio itself, whether it be a tape machine or whether it be digital?
I don't. I have recorded. I have recorded songs on 2-inch, on ADAT.
Yep.
On what are the other formats?
We had a 16-track 2-inch for a while, and then a 24-track.
Sure, 24-track, yes.
And then we had the 24-track digital tape machines, and we tied 2 of them together to get 48 tracks.
Yes.
We had ADATs, which were horrible.
ADATs were a disaster.
And keeping them in sync was horrible.
Yes, I remember that well. And then into, early Pro Tools, which was also a disaster.
It was a mastering software at first, just two channels.
Yeah. So, it's not the car, it's the driver, I think would be the shortest answer to that question. I've had people working on like prosumer type level stuff and coming out with competitive work.
Oh, absolutely.
And I've worked with people on 2-inch that should not be working at all. But so that's definitely it. That whole thing about like, how does it sound, doing this, whatever. I mean, I know just from watching my students that like what they do is they'll get a sound and then smash it and destroy it in every way conceivable. So the fact of whether or not you're using like a Neumann on the oboe or whatever it is that they're doing really means nothing when they're basically lighting the take on fire with with the different plugins and stuff like that.
Just because you have all the tools doesn't mean you should be using all the tools.
Right. But the end result kind of sometimes it just sounds cool, and one of the definitions of innovation is to take something that presently exists and break it. So 100 Gex came in as one of the artists in residence or whatever at NYU, and they were just like, yeah, we found our sound and the hyperpop thing by basically taking stuff and breaking it and just burning things, and Arca, same thing. Arca, who did production for like FKA Twigs and for Kanye and for lots of other things. I mean, like, it's just like taking those VU meters and just smashing them against slamming either side, because from like 0 to full on, to back and forth. So, again, fidelity is an open field. And I do think that that's what the Beatles were doing, by the way, right?
Oh, yeah, experimentation all the way.
Jeff Emmerich was not allowed to put his microphones into the kick drum, right? I mean, I think that was a major innovation because they were like, that's not how it's done, here at Abbey Road. But then they did that and they got like a different sound. So it's really kind of cool.
I watched a special the other night on Abbey Road, and they were talking about the Beatles a lot, obviously, and they're talking about the reverb chambers that they had, and a lot of the stuff was by accident. And they put the drum set in the reverb chamber at one point, and the neighbors got upset because it was too loud, and they had to just go with the take that they got because they upset the neighbors. So you run into the challenges that the listener doesn't know about. And like you said earlier, if you do it, that's why there might be a mistake on the album, because that was the only chance you had to capture that moment.
Yeah. Money is also an innovator.
Oh, yeah.
Budget is a big innovator. And too much budget can be a killer. It rarely is like an amazing part of it. You know what I mean? It's just funny listening to students and they're just like, Professor, why were songs 8 minutes long in the 70s? Like, why did everyone have like a 10-minute,
Stairway to Heaven.
Right. And now songs are under 2 minutes, or they're under 3 for sure.
Right.
And I feel like the answer was like money. A lot of the answer was money. I mean, ambition, sure. You get Bohemian Rhapsody and you get like the Queen things, of the world. But also they threw a lot of money at a lot of folks, and like the songs reflected. And now these under 3 minute things, they reflect the fact that a lot of these things are written and recorded on a laptop in a bedroom. Pretty cool. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier the prosumer style recording devices, the DAWs and so forth. When I was in Nashville, I had a chance to work with 3 producers on a regular basis. And I laugh about that because they were at different levels. I had a lower level one that most people didn't know about, one in the middle, and then one, Bob Bullock, was at the top. But the one at the bottom was recording in a prosumer level studio. I mean, he was just buying whatever gear he could get. He was setting things up. By far the most talented out of all 3 producers. He played every instrument. He was able to go in there and come up with parts and listen to the artists that would come in and be able to work with them and craft stuff, where the others may have the big glorious studios, but all they were able to do was press the right button.
Yeah.
So I mean, it comes down to the person and the actual touch that you can put on things, whether it be an instrument or the equipment.
When I worked with Jay Joyce, I think what he had was 2 Roland 1680s, and they were like linked together. It was like 2 answering machines, basically. Like,
those were the what was it, 12 fader little hard drive devices.
They're little hard drive devices, yeah. And you know what? You can make them sound great. You still can make them sound great. One time I interviewed Hank Williams III, and he was like, I do all my stuff on like basically these tiny things. He makes all the work that way as well. It's really about the driver. It's not about the car.
I got to master one of his projects, but I never got a chance to meet him.
Yeah, I mean, it was a phone interview, but like, interesting.
And it's funny too, because he lives, I think, 2 doors down from my mother-in-law. So I think at some point I would have run into the guy. There's so many things here that I wanted to touch base with you tonight, but I know it's the top of the hour and we're limited on time. Maybe get you to come back at one point. We can talk about the business side of things.
Sure.
But before we go, we have this thing we call Unsung Heroes, where we try to shine a little bit of light on somebody behind the scenes that doesn't typically get noticed. Is there somebody that has helped you in your career that you'd like to shine a little bit of light on?
There was a guy all the way back in the day when my dad took the songwriting class and then hated it and gave it to me because we had the same name. I took a class there. It was through the Songwriters Hall of Fame in New York City. And I didn't know what I was doing. I was writing. I don't know. Like I was doing whatever. I wrote a song, and the teacher in that class just looked at me and he was like, "You're a good writer." And I will never forget the moment, the face he was making, the person he was. I know nothing about him or anything, but I feel like it was the first time I was ever told that. And I think that's part of the reason I teach. When a student is a good writer, you damn know that I look them right in the eye and I say the same thing that was said to me. So hopefully it will stick in the same way.
That is awesome. Man, that sparked a memory in my head that I forgot for 20, 30 years now. I worked in a studio in Boston. It was called ESS Studios, and one of the owners walked in one day, and I've seen him on a number of occasions, but he came up to me this one day and looked at me and he goes, "Man," he goes, "you're a really good producer." He goes, "You're doing a really good job." And I'm thinking to myself, what's a producer? I was in there thinking I'm a songwriter and, going in and record demos. And he's like, "No, you're just a really good producer." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? I don't even know what a producer is." As years went on, I figured it all out, and I was like, "Oh, I enjoy producing. I'm not enjoying songwriting. I'm enjoying producing records."
Yeah, those moments I mean, they're given so freely and they pass by very, very quickly, but they are life changers. So I always, when I see something or when I see a student writing a certain way and then finding a different sort of vibe that like connects with them, I'll stop the class and I'll just be like, dude, or whoever, that was a door. That's a thing. Go to wherever that is, continue that path because there's something there. And that has been really helpful for some of them. And it's, for me, karmically, I'm like still giving back to that one moment. It's really cool.
But those are the moments. Those are the moments we live for.
Yes.
And as a student, which I was back in that day, and it sounds like you were yourself, that's what gives us the gas to keep moving on to that next little moment that carries us, several more miles.
Yeah.
Man, Mike, I really enjoyed having you here tonight. It's been a blast.
Me too, man. Thank you so much for having me.
No, I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Mike truly is an incredible talent, and I really do love the way he tells his stories through his songwriting. So please join me in giving Mike a big thanks. And thank you for taking the time to hang with me here tonight. I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. You can do just that and find the links to everything mentioned over at jayfranze.com/episode 9. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week.
Thanks for listening to The Jay Franze Show. Make sure you visit us at jayfranze.com. Follow, connect, and say hello. This episode has been brought to you by VR Knives, your source for 100% custom knives made by a true rock star. So, if you're in the market for a new piece of art, reach out to VR Knives. 407-421-5528. 407-421-5528.